It was one of those rare April mornings in London when the fog thinned just enough to let the light through. I had been sleeping soundly at Baker Street when I felt a presence beside me. Opening my eyes, I found Sherlock Holmes already fully dressed, standing by my bed, his sharp gaze fixed on the clock above the mantel. "Watson," he said in his calm, measured tone, "it's 7:15. Forgive the intrusion, but Mrs. Hudson has been woken, and so have I. Now it's your turn." I blinked, half annoyed and half curious. "Good heavens, Holmes, is it a fire?" "No, my dear fellow," he replied, the corner of his mouth curving into a smile. "A client, a young lady terrified and desperate, has arrived at this unholy hour, insisting to see me. When a woman braves London's morning chill and knocks people out of bed, you may be certain her story is no ordinary one." That, of course, was all it took. I was awake at once. "You were right to call me," I said. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." Moments later, we entered the sitting room. The fire was already lit its flames, painting gold over the old wallpaper. There, seated near the window, was a lady dressed in black, her hands trembling, her veil drawn low. Holmes greeted her gently. "Good morning, madam. My name is Sherlock Holmes. This is my trusted friend, Dr. Watson. You may speak as freely before him as before me." He motioned to the fire. "Please come closer. I see from your shivering that you've traveled far. Let me order you a cup of hot coffee." The woman obeyed, but her voice quivered as she said, "It is not the cold that makes me shiver, Mr. Holmes. It is fear. It is terror." At that moment, she lifted her veil, and even I, who had seen battlefields, felt a chill. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. Though she could not have been more than 30, her hair was streaked with gray. Holmes leaned forward, his tone soft but precise. "You must not fear, madam. Fear clouds the reason, and reason, clear, calm reason, is our greatest ally." English expression to cloud. The reason means to make your thinking unclear, like fog that blocks the view. The woman nodded faintly. "You have come by train this morning," Holmes continued. She gasped. "You know me then?" He smiled faintly. "Not personally, but I observed the second half of a return ticket in your left glove. You started early before dawn, I'd say, and came through muddy roads in a dog cart before reaching the station. The splashes on your sleeve are quite recent." I watched, as I always did, in admiration. Every detail, a drop of mud, a torn ticket, became language to him, words written in the grammar of observation. Expression in admiration means to watch with great respect or wonder. The lady could only whisper, "You are perfectly correct, sir. My name," she said after a pause, "is Helen Stoner. I live with my stepfather, Dr. Grimesby Roylott, at Stoke Moran in Surrey. He is the last of an old Saxon family, once rich, now ruined. He is not a kind man." Her eyes filled with dread at the thought. "2 years ago, my twin sister Julia died under circumstances so strange, so terrifying, that even now I wake screaming from the memory. And now, Mr. Holmes, I fear the same fate awaits me." Holmes leaned back, his fingertips pressed together beneath his chin, a familiar gesture when he listened deeply. "Pray tell us everything, Miss Stoner, from the beginning. Leave nothing out, no matter how small it may seem. A clue is often hidden in what others call a trifle." Expression. A clue is often hidden in a trifle. Even small details can reveal important truths. Helen began her account, her words trembling but clear. "My stepfather, Dr. Roylott, is a man of violent temper. He once lived in India, where he became rich through medicine, but also dangerous. He was imprisoned there for killing a servant in a fit of rage. Since his return to England, he has grown worse. The villagers fear him. He keeps wild Indian animals, a cheetah and a baboon that roam freely over the grounds. Charming company, murmured Holmes dryly. He quarrels with everyone, Helen went on. No servant will stay, so my sister and I have done all the work of the house ourselves. And then 2 years ago, Julia became engaged to be married. Within weeks, she was dead. Her voice faltered. It was late one stormy night. She came to my room, frightened, saying she'd heard a strange whistling sound in the darkness the past few nights. I told her it was nothing, perhaps the wind or the gypsies who camp nearby. She laughed, said goodnight, and went back to her room. But I couldn't sleep. And then suddenly I heard her scream. The firelight flickered as she spoke. I rushed out. She staggered from her room, her face white with terror. Her words, her last words, still echo in my ears. Oh my God, Helen, it was the band, the Speckled band. And then she fell dead at my feet. Silence fell over the room. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Holmes's voice, when he spoke, was low but steady. You say the door was locked from the inside. Yes, the windows barred, the chimney too narrow for a cat. The doctors found no poison, no wound, no sign of struggle. The coroner declared it death by shock, but she was pointing toward my stepfather's room. Holmes's eyes gleamed with that quiet fire I knew so well. And now he said softly, "You occupy her room. I was forced to move there only 2 nights ago," Helen replied. "My own chamber wall is being repaired. Last night I heard it again, the same whistle, just as she described. That is why I fled here this morning. Mr. Holmes, I am sure that if I sleep there again, I shall not live to see the dawn." Holmes stood. "You have done wisely to come. Fear not, we shall visit Stoke Moran today." As she rose to leave, Holmes suddenly reached for her hand. "Forgive me," he said gently, turning back her sleeve. On her wrist were dark bruises, the marks of fingers. He frowned. "You have been cruelly used." She covered her wrist quickly. "He is a hard man, Mr. Holmes, but perhaps he does not know his own strength." Holmes's eyes darkened, or perhaps he knows it all too well. As she left the room, Holmes turned to me. The sharpness of his tone returned like steel drawn from its sheath. "Watson," he said, "this is no ordinary matter. The lady's life depends on ours. Prepare yourself, we leave for Surrey within the day." And as the front door closed behind Helen Stoner, I saw the first light of cold spring creeping across Baker Street, and with it the shadow of one of the strangest cases of our time. When Helen Stoner's footsteps faded down the stairs, silence filled the sitting room once again. Holmes stood by the window, watching the gray morning light settle over Baker Street. The fire hissed quietly behind us, but I could feel the air tighten the calm before a storm. "She is in great danger," Watson Holmes said at last. "And that stepfather of hers, Dr. Grimesby Roylott, he is not merely a violent man. He is a man who knows no limits." I had read of Roylott before, though only in passing. A doctor of great intellect, once respected in Calcutta, later imprisoned for killing his servant. A man with temper and muscle to match his reputation. Holmes began pacing his hands clasped behind his back, that rhythmic stride he always fell into when ideas started forming. "There are too many contradictions here," he murmured. "A locked room, no wound, no poison. A mysterious whistle. A dying reference to a speckled band. Tell me, Watson, what does your medical mind suggest?" I considered the facts. It might have been shock, perhaps fear, or a sudden seizure. But the mention of a band that sounds like delirium, not diagnosis. Holmes gave a soft chuckle. "Excellent. You're already thinking as a detective must, distinguishing between what is seen and what is meant. English expression to read between the lines means to understand a hidden meaning behind someone's words. Before I could reply, there was a sharp, heavy knock on the door. Mrs. Hudson's startled voice followed. "Mr. Holmes, there's a gentleman here to see you. He insists it's urgent." Holmes looked at me, his eyebrows rising. "Ah, urgent. I suspect this gentleman is about 6 feet tall, broad as a doorway, with eyes like a hawk." The door burst open. And there, filling the frame exactly as Holmes had predicted, stood a towering man in a long frock coat, high gaiters, and a top hat that nearly scraped the lintel. His deep-set eyes burned with fury. His nose was sharp and predatory. "I am Dr. Grimesby Roylott of Stoke Moran," he declared. Holmes bowed slightly, perfectly composed. "Indeed, doctor. Pray take a seat." "I will do nothing of the kind," Roylott bellowed. "My stepdaughter has been here. I traced her. What lies has she told you?" Holmes's voice remained calm, almost amused. "It's rather cold for the time of year," he said lightly, "though I dare say it's warmer in Surrey." Roylott's face flushed a deep, angry red. "Do not trifle with me, sir. I am a dangerous man to cross." English expression. "Don't trifle with me" means don't play games or underestimate me. "I'm sure of that," Holmes replied pleasantly, "especially for anyone smaller than yourself." "Smaller?" Roylott roared. He took a step forward, his cane swinging menacingly. "You've heard of me, haven't you? Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard, Jack in office." My friend only smiled. "Your conversation is most entertaining, doctor. When you go out, do close the door behind you. There's a dreadful draught." The doctor's fury boiled over. He seized the steel poker from the fireplace and bent it double with his bare hands, the metal shrieking under his strength. "See that, Holmes?" he snarled. "That is what happens to meddling fools who cross me." He hurled the twisted poker into the grate and stormed out, his boots echoing down the stairs like the steps of a beast retreating to its lair. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then Holmes, with a quiet smile, picked up the poker and with one swift motion straightened it again. "Not quite so strong as he looks," he murmured. I exhaled slowly. "Holmes, the man's a brute. You're lucky he didn't attack you." "On the contrary," said Holmes, lighting his pipe. "He just gave us confirmation of everything we need to know. He's violent, cunning, and frightened the most dangerous combination." He paced to the window again, staring out at the swirling London mist. "This case, Watson, is a web woven from greed, fear, and clever design. But the pattern is still hidden. The lady's sister died mysteriously, and now she hears the same whistle in the same room." He turned sharply. "We must go to Stoke Moran today." Before our departure, Holmes spent several hours in study. When he returned from his morning walk, he carried a folded sheet of blue paper scrawled with figures. "I have examined the will of the late Mrs. Stoner," he said. "Dr. Roylott's income has dropped from £1,100 to £750. If both daughters were to marry, his allowance would shrink to a mere pittance." I understood at once. So Holmes. If one daughter were to die and the other were kept from marriage. He nodded gravely. "He keeps the entire fortune. Motive, my dear Watson, is the grammar of crime. Without it, the story makes no sense." Expression, the grammar of crime. Holmes's metaphor meaning the structure or logic that explains criminal actions. He folded the document and slipped it into his pocket. "It's time to see the scene itself. There's no better teacher than evidence." At noon, we hailed a cab and set out for Waterloo Station. The city faded behind us as we crossed into the countryside where spring sunlight glimmered through soft clouds. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the mystery of Stoke Moran already reached out toward us, waiting. Watson Holmes said quietly as we approached the station. "Bring your revolver. And your toothbrush." "My toothbrush." He smiled faintly. A man never knows whether he's staying for the night or for an explanation. And with that, we boarded the train for Surrey, leaving London's grey behind and heading straight toward the House of Shadows. The train to Surrey left the city behind in a cloud of white steam and iron rhythm. As we passed beyond the outskirts of London, the air grew clearer, and the fields, damp from the morning dew, rolled out in green and gold. Yet despite the beauty of the countryside, a heaviness seemed to hang between us. Holmes sat opposite me, motionless, his long fingers steepled under his chin, his gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the carriage window. I knew that look well. His mind was already deep inside the walls of Stoke Moran, mapping out every corridor, every locked room, every sound that haunted the night. After several miles, he spoke. "Watson," he said quietly, "you have heard the phrase, to follow a trail. It means to pursue clues, step by step, until one reaches the truth. Our trail today begins with fear, a fear so deep that it drove a young woman to London at dawn. Such fear is never without cause. English expression, to follow a trail. To pursue a line of evidence or clues in order to discover the truth." I nodded. "And yet the clues are all so strange, a whistle, a metallic sound, barred windows, and a dying cry about a speckled band." Holmes smiled faintly. "Strange, yes. But the more unusual the facts, the clearer the pattern becomes once you understand the grammar of the crime." Expression, the grammar of the crime. Holmes's metaphor meaning the logical structure that gives the case its meaning, just like grammar gives meaning to sentences. The train slowed as we neared Leatherhead Station. From there, we hired a small trap and set off along the narrow country lanes towards Stoke Moran. It was a bright spring day, with fleecy clouds scattered across a blue sky. But the closer we drew to the estate, the more somber the landscape became. The trees grew denser, the hedges wilder, and patches of dark bramble crept along the road like black veins. "There it is," said our driver, pointing ahead. Holmes and I both looked up. Across the meadows rose a large, ancient mansion, its stone walls mottled with lichen and age. One wing sagged in decay, its windows boarded up, and the roof partially collapsed. Yet smoke curled from the chimneys of the newer section, and a few bright curtains fluttered faintly behind the glass. The only signs of life in a house that otherwise seemed to brood in silence. "Stoke Moran," murmured Holmes. "Once a manor of pride, now a lair of secrets." He shaded his eyes, studying the structure like a hunter reading the terrain. "Do you see Watson?" "The central block, 2 wings. Her sister's room must be in the right-hand section, the one closest to the doctor's chamber." "Yes," I said. "The part where the scaffolding stands." "Repairs," she said. Holmes's lips curved slightly. "Repairs, perhaps. Or perhaps a pretext to move our client into the very room where her sister died. When motives align with opportunity, one must look twice." Expression, to look twice, means to examine something carefully, especially when it seems suspicious. As we approached the house, we saw a solitary figure hurrying toward us along the garden path. Helen Stoner's pale face brightened when she recognized us. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she cried. "I've been waiting for you since morning. He's gone to town, my stepfather. You're safe to examine anything you wish." "Excellent," said Holmes. "We've already had the pleasure of meeting the good doctor in London." At these words, Helen's face drained of color. Then he followed me. "Oh heavens, he'll know I've been here." "Be calm," Miss Stoner, Holmes said soothingly. "He may be cunning, but he is not omniscient. You must be brave and do exactly as I say." She nodded, gathering herself. "Yes, Mr. Holmes, I will." "Good. Now take us to your room and your sisters before it." The manor's hallway was cold and echoing, lined with cracked portraits and heavy wooden panels. A faint, unpleasant odor lingered, a mixture of damp tobacco and something metallic. The air felt old, as if it had not been renewed for years. We entered a long corridor with 3 doors opening off it. Helen pointed them out. "That one," she said, "was my stepfather's. The middle was Julia's, my sister's room. And the far one at the end is mine." Holmes moved silently from door to door, his eyes catching every detail: the scratches on the hinges, the worn pattern of the carpet, the faint scuff marks near the base of the walls. Then he turned to Helen. "Please, Miss Stoner, would you bolt the shutters of your sister's room?" She did as instructed. Holmes tried the window bars and tested the lock. They held firm. He even pressed at the wooden boards of the floor, tapping lightly with his walking stick. Nothing gave way. "No entrance here," he murmured. "And yet the room was sealed when she died. Curious." He moved to the fireplace, knelt, and examined the soot inside with his lens. No sign of forced entry here either. "Look, Watson, the chimney is barred with metal staples. No creature could have passed through." I crouched beside him. "Then how did the killer enter?" "That," said Holmes, rising, "is the question we came to answer." He paced to the wall near the bed and stopped suddenly. "Ah, what have we here?" There, just above the head of the bed, hung a bell rope, thick white and slightly frayed. It hung directly beside a small ventilator newly cut into the wall. Holmes tugged at the rope. It did not ring. "Curious indeed," he said. "Watson, note that it's not connected to any wire. A bell that doesn't ring and a vent that leads where?" He leaned close, peering through the small opening. Into the next room, Dr. Roylott's chamber. I felt a chill. A ventilator between 2 bedrooms. That's most irregular. Holmes's tone was quiet but intense. "Exactly, and placed directly above the bed. Very irregular indeed." He turned to Helen. "When were these additions made?" "About 2 years ago," she replied. "Just before my sister's death." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "How convenient. Everything seems to have changed 2 years ago, Miss Stoner, except the man who planned it." We crossed into Dr. Roylott's chamber next. The contrast was striking. The room was large and bare, its furniture heavy and crude. Against one wall stood a great iron safe. On its top rested a small dish of milk. "Strange," I said. "They keep no cat." Holmes's reply was almost inaudible. "Quite." He examined a wooden chair beneath the vent, then the bed beside it. Finally, his gaze fell upon a short dog whip coiled on the corner of the bedstead. But the lash had been tied into a loop like a noose. Holmes picked it up, studied it for a moment, and then laid it back with a grim expression. "Come, Watson," he said. "There is nothing more to learn here. Not yet." We followed him out to the lawn where the sunlight glittered through the tall grass. He stood motionless, eyes half closed, thinking deeply. At last, he spoke. "Miss Stoner, this is a very deep business indeed. Your life depends upon absolute obedience to my instructions. Do exactly as I say tonight, and you shall be safe." Her voice trembled. "I promise. Then we must act quickly. When your stepfather returns, pretend to have a headache and retire early. When he has gone to his room, open your shutters and place a lamp in the window as a signal to us. Then take what you need and sleep elsewhere, preferably in your old room. Watson and I will do the rest." Helen nodded, pale but resolute. "I understand, Mr. Holmes. I trust you completely." Holmes gave her a reassuring smile. "And you are right to do so. Remember this phrase, Miss Stoner. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. That, my dear lady, is the truest English lesson of all. And with that, we took our leave, making our way back toward the village inn. The sun was already sinking behind the hills, and the shadow of Stoke Moran stretched long and dark across the fields, like the shadow of something waiting to strike. The Crown Inn stood just at the edge of the village, a small, time-worn building with ivy creeping up its brick walls, and a faint smell of ale and chimney smoke drifting from its open door. Holmes and I secured a sitting room and a bedroom on the upper floor from which we could clearly see the distant outline of Stoke Moran. From our window, the decaying manor looked like a beast crouched upon the hill half in shadow. In the fading light, the scaffolding that clung to its right wing resembled a rib cage of rusted bones. Somewhere inside that house, a young woman would soon be pretending to sleep while her stepfather, a man of monstrous temper, prowled nearby. Holmes stood at the window, his pipe in hand, silent for a long time. Then, as the last rays of daylight faded, he spoke. "Watson, have you ever heard the idiom, 'Still waters run deep'?" "Yes," I replied. "It means that quiet things often hide strong currents beneath." "Precisely," he said. "And Stoke Moran is one such water calm on the surface, deadly beneath. Roylott's violence is obvious, but the method behind this mystery is far more cunning. He is no fool. He is a doctor, a man of science, and that makes him the most dangerous kind of criminal." English expression. Still waters run deep. People or places that seem quiet may hide intense or dangerous qualities inside. Holmes drew on his pipe thoughtfully, his eyes still fixed on the manor in the distance. "Tonight, my dear Watson, we shall learn whether knowledge can outwit cruelty." The evening passed slowly. A light breeze stirred the trees, carrying with it the faint smell of rain. Below us, the landlord moved about, muttering to himself as he shut up for the night. Holmes remained by the window, his gaze sharp and unblinking. "Do you know, Watson," he said suddenly, "the hardest thing about detective work is not solving mysteries. It's waiting for them to reveal themselves. Observation demands patience and silence. Expression to reveal itself, to become clear or visible after being hidden." I nodded, though I felt far from patient. "You think we're truly in danger tonight?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Danger is merely uncertainty with teeth. But yes, I expect we shall find something worth our trouble." He turned from the window and began pacing. "Let's review our facts. First, a locked room, no visible wound, no poison found. Second, the whistle, a signal repeated at night. Third, the dummy bell rope and the ventilator leading directly into Roylott's room. And finally, the saucer of milk. "The milk troubles me most," I said. "It suggests a pet, perhaps the cheetah or the baboon." Holmes shook his head. "No, a saucer of milk is for something far smaller. Something that can pass through a ventilator and reach a bed." He stopped pacing. "Tell me, Watson, have you ever heard the proverb, 'Murder will out'?" "Yes, it means that truth will always reveal itself in the end." "Indeed," said Holmes softly. "And tonight murder will out, though not in the way the murderer intended." At 9 o'clock, the last light in the windows of Stoke Moran vanished. Darkness swallowed the fields between the inn and the manor. Only the faint gleam of moonlight lit the hedges along the path. Holmes checked his watch. 2 hours, he said. "That's how long we wait before she gives the signal. When her stepfather retires, she will place a lamp in the window. That will be our cue." He poured himself a cup of coffee from the pot Mrs. Hudson had packed for the journey, black and strong the way he liked it, and set his revolver on the table beside it. I followed suit, checking my own weapon. The sound of the hammer clicking into place seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. At last, as the church clock in the distance struck 11, Holmes straightened suddenly. "There," he whispered. Across the dark meadow, a small yellow light appeared in the middle window of Stoke Moran. It flickered once, twice, then steadied. Holmes's eyes gleamed. "That's our signal. Come, Watson. Time to act." We descended the stairs quietly, pausing only to exchange a few words with the landlord. Holmes's tone was casual, as if he were mentioning a simple evening errand. "We may visit a friend and return late," he said. "No need to keep the door unlatched." Then we stepped out into the night. The cold air struck my face sharp and damp. The grass was wet beneath our feet, and the moonlight threw long, ghostly shadows across the path. Not a sound came from the village. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. We reached the park wall, crumbling and overgrown, and found an opening where time had eaten away the stones. Holmes slipped through first, silent as a cat. I followed, clutching my revolver tight. Through the trees, the manor loomed, its windows black, except for that single pale gleam in the upper story. Then, as we crossed the lawn, something moved. Out from a clump of laurel bushes leapt a figure, bent, twisted, and barely human in form. It landed on the grass with a guttural cry and scuttled away on all fours into the darkness. "My God," I whispered, freezing in place. Holmes's hand closed on my wrist. "Steady," he murmured, almost amused. "That was the baboon. Our host keeps charming company, as you see." We reached the house, climbed silently through the half-open window of Helen's room, and pulled the shutters tight behind us. Inside, the air was thick and cold. Holmes moved carefully, adjusting the lamp to its lowest flame. He motioned toward a chair beside the bed. "Sit there, Watson, and not a sound. Remember, the least noise could be fatal." I nodded. "And you?" "I'll take the bedside. I've brought my cane matches and a candle. Your pistol may become necessary, but only if I give the word." He turned down the lamp. The room plunged into darkness. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat. Outside, an owl hooted once. Somewhere far away, a clock tolled midnight, and then slowly the minutes began to stretch. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3. Still nothing. The air grew stifling, heavy with suspense. My eyelids ached from the strain of keeping them open. Suddenly, from the next room came the faint sound of movement, a soft scrape like metal against wood. Then the smell reached us, burning oil and heated metal. Holmes's hand tightened on the cane. "He's lighting his lantern," he whispered. A minute later, we heard it, a low, soft hiss like steam escaping from a kettle. Holmes sprang up, struck a match, and lashed furiously with his cane at the bell rope. "You see it, Watson," he cried. "You see it." But I saw only the flicker of flame, the shadow of his arm, and the horror frozen on his face. Then from the next room came a scream, a sound so terrible, so filled with pain and rage that it seemed to tear the night itself apart. It rose and rose, then died into silence. Holmes turned to me, pale as ash. "It is over," he said quietly. "And perhaps it is for the best. Take your pistol. We must see what has happened." The case of the Speckled band had reached its dreadful climax. For several seconds after that horrible cry, neither of us moved. The silence that followed was almost worse than the scream itself, thick, breathless, and cold. Even the flame of Holmes's candle seemed to tremble in fright. Then Holmes said in a low voice, "Now, Watson, bring your revolver." We stepped into the corridor. The air was heavy with the smell of burning oil. From the crack beneath Dr. Roylott's door, a faint light shone, flickering. Holmes struck twice against the wood. No answer. He turned the handle. The door opened. What we saw made me draw back involuntarily. Dr. Grimesby Roylott sat dead in the chair beside his table. The lamp beside him cast a yellow beam that lit his pale face, the wide eyes frozen in horror, and his stiff hands clutching the arms of the chair. Across his forehead was what at first seemed to be a strange patterned band, yellowish with dark brown spots, until it began to move. I gasped. The band, Holmes whispered grimly. The speckled band. As we watched, the band lifted its flat head and hissed a dry, awful sound that made my blood turn to ice. It was a snake. Holmes's arm shot forward. With perfect control, he snatched the dog whip from the dead man's lap, made a loop with practiced precision, and threw it around the creature's neck. It coiled and writhed its diamond-shaped head, striking at the air. He yanked it clear of the body, flung it into the iron safe standing open beside the wall, and slammed the door. The metallic clang echoed through the chamber like the closing of a tomb. Holmes stood panting for a moment, his face drained of color. Then slowly he straightened his coat and said in a steady tone, "A swamp adder, the deadliest snake in India. It was his weapon, Watson, and now it has turned upon him." I stepped closer to the body, unable to tear my eyes away from that terrible face. "He's been dead only minutes," I said softly. Holmes nodded. "Yes. The creature struck him when I lashed at the rope. I must have driven it back through the ventilator in panic straight toward its master. English expression turned upon to attack the one who used or trusted you, to betray or strike back at the master." The truth began to unfold before my eyes like a dark flower opening at dawn. Holmes moved to the table where a small lamp still burned beside a folded paper and a saucer of milk. "There's your training method, Watson," he said. "The milk for feeding, the whistle for recall, and the ventilator for passage." He pointed toward the ceiling. Night after night, he would release the snake through the vent down the dummy bell rope onto the bed where his victim slept. If the snake struck so much, the better. If not, he could whistle it back and try again the next night. I felt a chill crawl over my skin. Then Julia's last words, "the speckled band." She meant this creature. "Exactly," said Holmes. "The spotted pattern on its scales. Her dying attempt to name her murderer. Expression to name one's murderer, to identify the guilty party even with one's last breath. A phrase of tragic courage." He paced to the window, looking out into the dark garden beyond. Roylott's motives were simple. Greed. Each daughter's marriage would cost him £250 a year. One had already been silenced. The other, our client, was to follow. But we have stopped that. For a while we stood in silence, the flickering lamplight glancing off the iron safe. The horror of the night pressed in on me. "Holmes," I said quietly, "are you certain this was justice? The man died by his own weapon, but by your hand's interference." Holmes turned his face pale but calm. "When one digs a pit for another, Watson, one must be careful not to fall into it oneself. It is an old proverb. Violence does in truth recoil upon the violent. He chose this death the moment he trained that creature for murder. Expression to dig a pit for another, to plan harm against someone. Used when the harm backfires on the planner." He sighed. "Yet I confess I do not rejoice. The man was brilliant in mind, monstrous in heart. I would rather have seen that intellect used for healing, not killing." He bent down, taking the lamp from the table, and added softly, "Let us leave this dreadful room. The air here is thick with death." We returned to Helen Stoner's chamber, where she waited pale and trembling, her hands clasped tightly together. When she saw our faces, she rose in alarm. "My stepfather." Holmes hesitated only a moment. "He will trouble you no more, Miss Stoner. The danger is past." She pressed a hand to her lips. her eyes filling with tears. "You mean he is dead?" "Yes," Holmes said gently. "By his own hand, though not in the way he expected. He used a weapon too cruel for this world, and it turned against him." She sank into the chair, her body shaking from relief and shock. Holmes placed a hand lightly upon her shoulder. "You are safe now, Miss Stoner. In the morning you will go to your aunt's home in Harrow. Dr. Watson and I shall see you safely there." For a long moment, the three of us sat in silence, listening to the wind rising outside. Then Holmes said quietly, "I have learned many languages. Miss Stoner, Latin, French, even the silent grammar of crime, but there is one universal language I value most." She looked up at him puzzled. "And what is that?" "Mercy," he said simply. "It speaks in every heart, and tonight it has spared yours." As dawn broke over the fields, we left Stoke Moran behind. The rising sun painted the wet grass with streaks of gold, washing away the night's terror. On the train back to London, Holmes leaned back in his seat, his eyes half closed in thought. "Watson," he said finally, "do you see how language teaches us truth? The speckled band was no metaphor, it was the clue itself, hidden in plain words. We must always listen not only with our ears, but with our reason." I nodded. "Then the lesson, Holmes, is that words like clues can save lives when we understand them rightly." He smiled faintly. "Spoken like a true detective, my dear doctor, and a good student of English." The countryside slid past the window as we rode toward Baker Street. The case of the speckled band had ended, but the echo of its riddle would linger, a warning and a lesson both. Holmes closed his eyes and murmured, "Justice spoke tonight." Watson quietly and in perfect English. The train wheels clattered rhythmically beneath us as we made our way back to London. Outside, the dawn spread gently across the English countryside, pale gold over the misty meadows, the kind of quiet beauty that feels unreal after a night of horror. I watched Holmes in silence for several minutes. He sat perfectly still, the brim of his hat casting a shadow over his face. His long fingers joined beneath his chin, the very image of calm reflection. At last I said softly, "You saved that poor woman's life tonight, Holmes." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled slowly and said, "Saved one life, perhaps, but another was lost." I take no joy in that balance, Watson. It reminds me that truth and tragedy often share the same rail. They run side by side until one forces the other to stop. English expression runs side by side to exist together or happen at the same time, often in contrast, like truth and danger. I nodded thoughtfully. "And yet you can't blame yourself for the doctor's death. His own scheme destroyed him." Holmes turned his sharp eyes toward me. "True, but I always remind myself, when we interfere with evil, we must do so with precision. Otherwise, the serpent we strike might coil back upon us. Every investigation, like every sentence, must be constructed carefully." He paused, tapping his finger on the window ledge. "Language and logic are brothers, Watson. To misuse either is to invite disaster. Expression to invite disaster, to cause trouble or harm through one's own careless action." As the train curved past the Thames, the morning light revealed the smoke rising from London's chimneys in the distance. The city was waking, unaware of the night's deadly struggle. "Holmes," I said, "there's something I still don't quite understand. How did you know the snake was the murder weapon before you saw it?" Holmes smiled faintly, as though he had been waiting for the question. "It was a simple matter of elimination," he said. "No poison, no wound, no entry or exit to the room. Yet the whistle always, the whistle and the milk. Two clues that point to something alive. something trained. Add the ventilator, the rope, and the immovable bed, and the rest, as the English say, fitted like clockwork. English expression fit like clockwork when every part of a plan works together perfectly. He leaned back and continued. When you hear a whistle at night and smell burning oil, you may be sure of one thing: there is more than air moving through that vent. Roylott's mind steeped in Eastern methods, and cruelty sought a way to kill without leaving a trace. He found it in that venomous creature. I shuddered at the memory of its diamond-shaped head, the hiss the way it coiled on the floor before Holmes caught it. But how could he have lived with such a monster in his own home, I asked. Holmes gave a short, mirthless laugh. Men who keep secrets often grow fond of dangerous pets, Watson. They remind them of themselves. The train slowed as we entered Waterloo Station. The noise of the city, flooded back carriage wheels, shouts the hiss of steam. Holmes rose, adjusting his coat with his usual precision. "There is one more lesson in this case," he said as we stepped onto the platform. Miss Stoner's story began in fear. She spoke tremblingly, her voice uncertain, her thoughts scattered. But by trusting reason, by describing each detail, she transformed fear into evidence. That, Watson, is how language conquers panic. Expression to conquer panic, to overcome fear by thinking or acting clearly. I smiled. "You make it sound like English itself can save lives." "Indeed," Holmes said with a faint glimmer of amusement. "A well-chosen word is often sharper than a sword. Misused, it can wound. Used rightly, it can protect." He hailed a cab, and as we climbed in, he added, "Words are clues, Watson. Each one reveals something about the speaker. That is why I listen to how people speak, not only what they say. Grammar, tone, hesitation. They are the footprints of the mind." Back at Baker Street, Mrs. Hudson greeted us with astonishment. "You're back already. I heard you went into the countryside." Holmes smiled kindly. "Yes, Mrs. Hudson. We went to Surrey and returned with one less villain and one more English idiom." "An idiom?" she asked, puzzled. Holmes nodded. "To have something come back to bite you. It means that your own bad action turns against you, as Dr. Roylott learned rather painfully last night. Expression to come back to bite you when a bad action or decision causes problems for you later." Mrs. Hudson shook her head, muttering, "Well, I hope your idioms are safer than your cases, Mr. Holmes." Holmes laughed quietly. "So do I, my dear lady, so do I." Later that evening, we sat once more before the fireplace, the warmth and safety of Baker Street wrapping around us like a blanket. The storm had passed, and outside the rain pattered softly against the window. Holmes stretched his long legs toward the fire, his eyes thoughtful. "You know, Watson, what fascinates me about crime isn't the cruelty, it's the communication. Every act, every clue, every word is a message. The criminal speaks. We must learn to translate." I smiled at that. "Then tonight's lesson was both linguistic and moral." "Precisely," he said. "And what would you say that lesson is?" I considered. "That language, like logic, can reveal the truth if we listen carefully. And that evil, no matter how clever, eventually writes its own confession." Holmes's eyes brightened. "Well said, my friend. You're improving faster than most of my pupils." He picked up his violin and began to play a slow, haunting melody that floated through the room like a gentle echo of the night's mystery. The notes were low and reflective, each one like a word in a sentence only he could compose. When the final note faded, he said quietly, "Every case ends with silence, Watson. That's when we truly understand what the words meant." I looked into the firelight, the glow dancing across the familiar clutter of Baker Street, and thought how right he was. The following morning dawned gray and soft, the London fog wrapping Baker Street in its familiar shroud. The fire was burning steadily when I came down to breakfast. and I found Holmes seated at the table, half hidden behind a newspaper. The aroma of strong coffee filled the air, mingling with the quiet crackle of coal. Without lowering the paper, Holmes said, "Good morning, Watson. You'll be pleased to know the morning edition has reported Dr. Roylott's death as a tragic accident involving one of his exotic pets. Scotland Yard has accepted the explanation entirely." I sat down opposite him, shaking my head. "So the matter ends there?" "For the world, yes," Holmes replied. "But for us, it ends only when the meaning is understood. Crime, you see, is a kind of sentence, and every sentence must have its grammar. English expression. The grammar of fear. Holmes's way of saying that even fear follows patterns that can be read and understood." He folded the paper neatly and fixed me with those gray, analytical eyes that seemed to look through walls. "This case, my dear Watson, is a textbook example of how fear distorts language." Miss Stoner's words were tangled with terror. She said, "The Speckled Band," not knowing she was naming her sister's killer. Yet through that confusion, truth still spoke. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully. "So you're saying that fear reveals the truth, even when the speaker doesn't mean it to?" Holmes nodded. "Exactly. People lie with logic, but rarely with fear. In fear, they speak their purest English." He smiled faintly, as though the idea itself amused him. "That is why in every interrogation I listen not only for facts, but for rhythm, for the tremor, the hesitation, the misplaced word. Grammar tells you what a person knows. Tone tells you what they feel. Expression tone tells you what they feel, a reminder that how something is said often reveals more than what is said." After breakfast, Holmes rose and went to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the fog swirled around the passing hansom cabs, their wheels hissing softly on the wet stones. "Do you remember," he said, "how Helen Stoner described the night her sister died? A whistle, a metallic clang, and a cry of terror. All simple sounds, but each was a word in the murderer's secret sentence." "Words in a sentence," I repeated. "You mean every detail was part of a structure?" Holmes turned and smiled. "Precisely. Observation is only translation, Watson. We translate actions into meaning just as we translate words into understanding. Expression translate actions into meaning to interpret behavior or events, to find their hidden purpose." He lit his pipe, pacing as he spoke. "Dr. Roylott wrote his crime in a language few men could read. The ventilator was his comma, the rope his preposition, the snake his final period. But like any writer of lies, he left traces of grammar too clear for a reader like me to ignore." I couldn't help laughing softly. "You make it sound like literature, Holmes." He raised an eyebrow. "Crime is literature, Watson, poorly written by fools, brilliantly edited by men like us." The rest of the day passed quietly. Holmes received 2 letters, both requests for consultations, which he dismissed with a wave of his hand. "No, no," he said. "After last night we must give the mind a rest. Too much reasoning dulls the instinct." He stretched in his chair, the afternoon light glinting off the brass of his violin. "You know, Watson, there's an old proverb that says, 'Knowledge is power.' True enough. But I prefer a more practical one. Observation is peace. When we see things as they are not as we fear them, we stop suffering twice. Expression to suffer twice, to suffer once in reality and again in imagination through worry or fear." I smiled. "That's almost philosophical, Holmes." He chuckled. "Almost, yes. Don't tell the philosophers. They'd be jealous." In the evening, as dusk settled over Baker Street, Holmes sat at the fireplace, turning the events of the case over in his mind. "Watson," he said, "have you noticed how often the most dangerous people use gentle things as weapons? A pet snake, a cup of milk, a whistle. There's something linguistic about that as well." "How so?" I asked. He looked up. "Because evil often hides in the familiar. It dresses itself in harmless words, trust, family, home, and then uses them to deceive. Just as a sentence can disguise its real subject, a criminal disguises his real intent. Our task is to find the subject beneath the surface." Expression. Find the subject, Holmes's metaphor for uncovering the real motive or meaning behind appearances. I nodded slowly. "And you found it not just in the evidence, but in the language of fear itself." Holmes smiled faintly. "Fear, my dear Watson, is the most eloquent teacher in English. It teaches clarity if one has the courage to listen." He stood and poured himself a cup of tea. The flickering firelight caught the tired lines beneath his eyes, but there was satisfaction there too, the quiet satisfaction of understanding. Later, as the clock chimed 9, Holmes looked toward the violin resting on its stand. "A curious world, is it not?" he said softly. "We chase meaning through chaos, and somehow each case teaches us a new word or a new truth." He plucked a few gentle notes, low and meditative. Tonight's word was mercy. Even in fear, it found its voice. I listened as the music drifted through the room, slow and mournful, the last chapter of the mystery told without words. Outside, the fog thickened once more, wrapping Baker Street in silver silence. "Good night, Holmes," I said at last. He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "Good night, Watson. May your dreams be grammatical." And with that, the great detective played on his bow, drawing from the violin a melody, both sorrowful and calm, like the lingering echo of a lesson learned in the quiet grammar of fear. The following day, the sky above London was washed in pale blue, the kind of fragile light that follows a storm. I found Holmes already awake, sitting in his armchair with the morning paper folded beside him. His breakfast lay untouched. A single line of smoke rose from his pipe, curling upward like a question mark in the still air. "You look thoughtful," I said, pouring myself some tea. Holmes nodded slightly. "Yes, Watson. I've been thinking about truth not as a detective's prize, but as a form of language." I smiled. "Language again." He glanced up amused. "Of course. Every case we solve is a conversation between the world and the mind. The world speaks in clues. The mind answers in reason. When both sides understand each other, justice is achieved. English expression justice is achieved, a formal phrase meaning that fairness or truth has been restored after wrongdoing." He leaned back, his gaze turning distant. Dr. Roylott was fluent in cruelty, but illiterate in mercy. He understood power, but not consequence. In the grammar of morality, he used only the active voice, always acting, never reflecting. I laughed softly. "And in that sense, Holmes, you're the editor who corrected his errors." Holmes chuckled. "A grim metaphor, Watson, but not inaccurate. Yet I prefer to think of myself as a translator. The world writes its messages in chaos. I merely render them into English. Expression render into English to translate something complex or unclear into plain, understandable language." As he spoke, the faint chime of church bells reached us through the window, soft measured notes drifting across the morning fog. Holmes rose, stretched, and began pacing the room as he so often did when his thoughts gathered momentum. "Language, my dear Watson, is not only for poets. It is the foundation of reason. Each word, each pause, each silence, they are clues. In the Speckled band, it was not the evidence that revealed the crime. but the words of a dying woman. That phrase, the speckled band, was her final confession, her attempt to name death itself. He turned sharply, the movement of his coat stirring the air. "Do you see?" She did not know the meaning of her own words, yet the words carried meaning beyond her comprehension. That Watson is the miracle of speech and the burden of truth. Expression, the burden of truth. The responsibility or emotional weight of knowing and speaking the truth. I nodded slowly, feeling the gravity of his words. "You mean that even when we speak imperfectly, the truth still hides somewhere in our language?" Holmes smiled faintly. "Precisely. To be human is to speak in riddles, but every riddle contains its answer." He returned to his seat, setting his pipe aside. "You see, Watson, Miss Stoner's case will fade from the headlines. The world will forget the details, the whistle, the rope, the deadly creature. But what must not be forgotten is the lesson. Fear distorts, cruelty deceives, but observation, calm, patient observation, restores clarity. And clarity is justice." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled softly, reflecting in the polished brass buttons of Holmes's dressing gown. Then he said quietly, "Do you know what the English language and justice have in common?" "What's that?" I asked. "They both depend on balance," he replied. "Subject and verb, crime and consequence. If one outweighs the other, the whole sentence or the whole world collapses." I smiled. "You sound like a philosopher this morning." He returned the smile, a glint of humor in his eyes. "Only a grammarian of crime, my dear Watson." The doorbell rang then, and Mrs. Hudson entered, announcing, "A young lady to see you, Mr. Holmes, Miss Helen Stoner." Holmes gestured for her to enter. Helen stepped into the room, her face no longer pale and drawn, but calm, almost radiant. She carried herself with quiet confidence, the fear that once filled her eyes replaced by relief and gratitude. "Mr. Holmes," she said softly, "I came to thank you. You've given me back my life." Holmes bowed slightly. "You owe me no thanks, Miss Stoner. It was your own courage that carried you through the darkness. But I would never have found the truth alone," she insisted. "You heard what I could not say. You understood what I only feared." Holmes smiled gently. "That, Miss Stoner, is what detectives and teachers are for." Her eyes glistened. "Then you are both." He inclined his head. "Perhaps. But remember, language is the bridge between fear and understanding. You crossed it yourself." After she had gone, Holmes remained standing at the window for a long while, watching her carriage disappear into the crowded street. The early sunlight caught the smoke rising from the chimneys, painting it gold. Finally, he turned to me and said quietly, "It is always the same, Watson. We end with silence, but that silence is full of meaning." He picked up his violin and began to play. The melody was slow, thoughtful, and strangely beautiful. It spoke of winter mornings and quiet courage, of fear faced and overcome. As the notes filled the room, I thought of his words, that justice was a kind of language, and that perhaps every case, every mystery was a lesson in how to read the world. When the final note faded, Holmes lowered his bow and said simply, "The grammar of fear has been corrected, Watson. The sentence is complete." And in that quiet golden light, I realized that the Speckled Band was not just a tale of crime, but of clarity, of how words, reason, and courage together could turn even the darkest night into understanding.